Howling Mine is a pretty interesting card. On its face, it seems kind of bad, and it kind of is. But it's interesting for a few reasons. So, let's talk about it. Howling Mine is a continuous artifact that... No, wait. That doesn't mean anything anymore. Howling Mine is an artifact that costs 2 generic mana. If Howling Mine is untapped at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. Now, before we get into the meat of this discussion, you may notice a couple things. First off, it doesn't say anything about this card being untapped, so let's talk about that first. Tapping used to be more significant in Magic the Gathering. If a creature would become tapped while blocking, it wouldn't deal combat damage, which is kind of interesting. Tapped artifacts wouldn't be able to activate their abilities even if it didn't require a tap to activate, and artifacts with abilities that were always active would be shut off when the card was tapped. To respect a common strategy, 2 cards were given errata that allowed them to keep this effect: Howling Mine and Winter Orb. This change occurred during the 6th edition rules change, and it's important to Howling Mine because people would cast Howling Mine and tap it down, most commonly with Icy Manipulator, so their opponent wouldn't get to draw the second card, but they would get to draw a second card on their turn because Howling Mine would untap before their draw step and would be turned back on. So 5th edition and earlier versions of Howling Mine don't explain that interaction because it's a game rule that affected all artifacts. How often this rule actually came up for any card not named Howling Mine or Winter Orb is debatable, which might have been why they decided to simplify the rules in this way. It is hard to say though, I wasn't in the room when they made that decision. Let's talk about the other major change this card has gotten. If you manage to find yourself a version of this card from Unlimited Edition or earlier, you'll notice it says Continuous Artifact on it. There were actually 3 subtypes of artifacts, or maybe they were super types? It's hard to say since that wasn't defined in the rules at the time, but I'm rambling here and I need to focus. There were 3 types of artifacts, well 4 if you include artifact creatures, which interestingly enough didn't have a creature type until 9th edition, and damn it, no, focus. Sorry, 3 types: poly-artifact, mono-artifacts, and continuous artifacts. All 3 of these artifact types were made redundant by the creation of the tap symbol. Poly-artifacts were artifacts with activated abilities that didn't require a tap, like Rocket Launcher. Mono-artifacts are just artifacts that have the tap symbol in their activation cost, like Soul Ring or Millstone. And continuous artifacts just don't have an activation cost because the effects are, well, continuous. Like Howling Mine. There. Now you know a thing. How lucky you are. Anyway, Howling Mine is pretty interesting. Obviously, it has the strategy we just talked about where you use it for card advantage and deny your opponent card advantage, but this is kind of a risky way to use Howling Mine. It's like a 2-card combo that draws you a single card per turn. Not what I'd call the most impressive or efficient strategy, especially because Icy Manipulator costs 4 mana. There are other ways to tap the Howling Mine, like with Relic Barrier and other new cards I can't think of, but it's still not a good use of your resources. That's not to say that Howling Mine is bad though, just that using 2 cards to draw an extra card per turn isn't the most efficient thing you can be doing. So, then how do you use Howling Mine? I hear you asking. Well, if you're playing with modern rules, in a modern format, you probably don't. Unless it's Commander. It's great in Commander if you're more interested in having a good time than you are at winning. It's also not the worst play because people are going to want to kill you last because they're addicted to drawing cards, and you're the hookup. So yeah, depending on power level, play it in Commander, it can be great there. I probably wouldn't recommend it in Bracket 4 or CEDH, but there might be a deck that plays it and is correct for doing so. I wouldn't run it generically though. But if you're playing old school Magic, depending on the variant, you can use it for a funny mill deck by combining Howling Mine with Stasis. That's pretty funny, isn't it? You can also use Howling Mine with Black Vice to burn out your opponent, but these kind of strategies are risky since you're giving your opponent more opportunities to draw into their answers. I don't think it's good enough for pre-modern though, which is kind of sad. You could use it in an ultimate combo that wins you the game though, if you have the stones. So, to win the game with Howling Mine, all you need is 7 mana worth of permanents in play and 12 mana. That shouldn't be too hard to ask, right? Here's how it works. Cast the Howling Mine and a card called Hive Mind. There's something about the way those two cards sound that makes me enjoy this combo. I think it's alliteration, but I'm too stupid to know for sure. It doesn't matter. Let me explain what's going on. The Howling Mine will be relevant in a moment. Hive Mind says that whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, each other player copies that spell. Each of those players may choose new targets for his or her copy. That's pretty neat, right? Anyway, after you cast that, then you cast Enter the Infinite. So, Enter the Infinite says, draw cards equal to the number of cards in your library, then put a card from your hand on top of your library. You have no maximum hand size until your next turn. That's pretty sweet, right? Anyway, Hive Mind will activate and every player will draw their entire deck and put one card back. Now, assuming nobody in the game can win at instant speed after being handed their entire deck, you pass the turn. I mean, that's probably not likely, right? Anyway, because of the Howling Mine, then each player draws 2 cards. Like Pot of Greed. But here's the catch. They only have 1 card in their library because of Enter the Infinite. So they deck out and lose. And then it's your turn and you'd also lose, but the game is over because everyone else in the game lost, and so the state-based... you win the game. This is probably the most efficient way to win the game that I've ever heard of. And I'm really scared this will become hard meta in any format that these cards are legal in, so keep this between us, okay? You can use this as a win con in Modern, Legacy, Vintage, Commander, and Oathbreaker. And probably Canadian Highlander, but if you're going to win the game this way in Canadian Highlander, I would do it really quickly, because as soon as anyone that works at that format, like, figures this out, I suspect each of these cards will be 4 points, because this is a nasty combo. See, Howling Mine is an interesting card. And not just because it's a card that costs you a card and gives you and your opponent a card every turn, but it gives them the first card. That doesn't make it bad, it just gives it character. I don't know, dudes. I really like Howling Mine, and I think it's a funny as fuck card, and it brings me a lot of joy. It's also been around since the very beginning, and has been printed into like every core set ever printed, including 10th edition and M10, which are different sets. Obviously. But let's talk about the art, because despite the incredibly interestingness of this card, I am running out of ways to string words together while talking about it. It was originally illustrated by Mark Poole, and this is a classic art, of course. This art has been redone a few times, and an altered version of it appears in Brothers War, and I do like the alternative version. I think it's super cool. Oh yeah, and this is going to bring this video way over time, but while we're talking about the original art of Howling Mine, I should address a misconception I hear parroted all across the internet. Now, normally I would talk about this when I'm talking about Word of Command, but I don't honestly know if I'm ever going to talk about that card again, because despite being incredibly interesting, it's not a good card. Anyway, people always say that the art for Word of Command is a zoomed-in copy of the art for Howling Mine, and that's just not true. You literally just need to, like, look at the art to see this. Now, I sympathize with anyone that believes this, and I'm not really making fun of you because they do look really similar. But the eyes are different, and if it was just a zoomed-in work, it would have been credited to Poole, not to Jesper. Here, I can prove it with editing, I guess? Yeah, I don't fucking know. Check this out. Okay, so I've imported Howling Mine and then Word of Command. I'm going to add an alpha channel to the Word of Command. Then I'm going to turn the white in the image of Word of Command to transparency, or color to alpha channel, however you want to say that. This will allow us to see what's going on behind it. Now I'm going to shrink down the Word of Command, which is the same as zooming it in, kind of. I could also just blow up the Howling Mine, but it's the same result, it doesn't matter. Anyway, I shrink the Word of Command to 280 by 390 pixels, which is close enough to show that this isn't true. Now, the eyes are kind of similar, for sure, but they are different shapes. The pupils are in different places, and Jesper would have needed to paint over the mouth of the mine, because otherwise you could still see that. Wouldn't it just be more likely that he phoned in a lazy-ass painting by covering a canvas with black except for the spot where the eyes are? But maybe it runs deeper than that, and he really got fucking tricky with it. If we flip it horizontally, it actually just looks less correct. But what about vertically? That evil genius Jesper being lazy with art, we got him now, boys. Huh, nope. And if we flip it horizontally again, just to make sure, it looks even worse. Okay, I'm being a bit facetious here, but my point is, this isn't true. It's not a fun fact, it's just the art on cards is small, someone said it once, and it's kinda hard to fact check, and it's an interesting story, so people just believe it. It didn't happen, though. Jesper just did a lazy as fuck painting, which is fine, there's no problem with that. Anyway, Howling Mine, Art 2, Electric Boogaloo, Dana Knutson illustrated their version of Howling Mine, and it first appeared in 7th edition. I really like this art. It pays homage to Poole's work, but adds its own twist to the story of the card. It's very cool and fun to look at. 10 out of 10 for me. And then first appearing in 10th edition, this piece was done by Ralph Horsley, which is a really awesome name. Anyway, this art is sick as hell. This shit looks like you'd find it on an 80s metal album. I really like this piece. This is also the only art that tries to illustrate the howling aspect of Howling Mine, which is super fucking cool. But yeah, Howling Mine is a really interesting and fun card because it's symmetrical, which is fun design because it begs the question, what do you do to break parity on this? And it's also just fun in kitchen table. Drawing 2 cards a turn instead of 1 generally makes for more explosive games, and fast games are fun games. I like Howling Mine. I think it's a super sweet card that you should consider fucking around with if you play kitchen table, because it's an interesting and fun card. But that's all I really have to say about Howling Mine. So I guess I'll see you tomorrow when I talk about... Fuck, I should figure that out. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Howling Mine, so please let me know in the comments. You can like the video if you like, subscribe if you give a shit, but either way, I hope you have a magical day.